Join us as we dive into the history, hauntings, and high strange of the world to try to better understand the paranormal. I will be your guide. I am paranormal researcher and investigator Eric Freeman-Sims. Welcome to the Unseen Paranormal Podcast. Hey everybody, thank you for tuning in today. We are chatting with author, podcast host, and seeker of all things odd and macabre, J.W. Ocker. J.W. is the author of Cursed Objects, Strange but True Stories of the World's Most Infamous Items, the New England Grimpendium, the United States of Cryptids, a tour of America's myths and monsters, and many more. J.W. is also the host of Odd Things I've Seen, the podcast, and creator of oddthingsI'veSeen.com. J.W. Ocker's books are available on Amazon, Kindle, BarnesandNoble.com, and wherever fine books are sold. For more info on J.W. Ocker, visit oddthingsi'veSeen.com. Links will be in the show notes as usual. Hey, J.W., thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate the invite.
Yeah. Always, I like to just talk to a whole bunch of different people about everything paranormal. It's just, everybody has their own take and own experiences. So you've written quite a few nonfiction paranormal books about cursed objects. And like I said, the newest book is The United States of Cryptids. And so how did you get into writing about all of this stuff and into the kind of the odd and macabre of the world?
Mostly out of boredom and depression. I've always been into the weird stuff. Fringe stuff has always kind of fascinated me from childhood. But the way it actually got started for me as a career or as whatever it's become is, I was living in this tiny apartment in Maryland. I'm from Maryland, and just really in a bad time in my life. And one day I just realized, I'll just leave my apartment and go see something cool. So I started doing that, just leaving and going to find weird stuff that like just appealed to me. I call them oddities, like oddities of art and culture, history, art. More often than not, when it's odd, it's macabre. And almost 99% of the time, it's going to be macabre. And I already kind of had an aesthetic that was bent in that direction. So I just went and saw weird stuff, whether it was, a monument to the Orson Welles, New Jersey, the aliens attack that was out there in New Jersey, or Centralia, that ghost town that's on fire. That kind of weird stuff just appealed to me. I just drove to it, went home, wrote about it for a blog. This was like the mid-aughts, back when people blogged. And I started blogging on my own time and just seeing more stuff and more stuff and more stuff. And then that kind of generated an audience for the blog and then gave me book opportunities. So now, most of my books involve me actually traveling to them. So if I write a book about cursed objects or about cryptids, I'm not just researching and writing. I'm actually going out in the field so I can see things with my own eyes, because that's kind of where the fun is for me, to have an actual experience versus just the writing of it. Yeah,
that's awesome. Because even a lot of cryptozoologists, as they call themselves, they don't go out to all the places that they necessarily write about, unless it's like, just one topic that they're covering, one specific cryptid or something. They might, kind of be the authority on that. But yeah, for you to write a book about cryptids and actually gone to most of these places and seen these things, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's. I always tell people that the book itself is like almost unnecessary. Like I come out of these travelogue experiences with like new friends and new experiences and like memories and like all these things, and the book itself is just like kind of the cherry on top. Like that, it's fine, but it's not the best thing I get out of it.
Yeah, that's what I love about investigating is learning the location and the history. It's not even necessarily all about the evidence, although that's cool, to see a ghost or experience things like that. But sometimes it's the journey that's more fun than the actual experience.
Oh, totally. And I have my, and we can dig into, if you want, my own issues with the paranormal, but I always tell, when I do a talk with a ghost hunting group, I'll tell them hey, listen, I don't know if I believe in ghosts, but I do believe in exploration. I do believe in spooky. I love spooky tales. I love ghost stories. I love old buildings. I love going through them at night. I love history. I love local history. I love spooky tales. So I have everything in common. I just haven't, bumped into Casper yet.
Yeah. Well, I've been investigating for over 20 years. So I've seen and experienced lots of things. And like I've said many times on my show, I'm a skeptical believer is what I call myself. So it takes a lot to really convince me that something is paranormal. I'll be the first one to debunk anything. I would look for any explanation that I could possibly can find, and then I may put it in the realm of paranormal. But most of the time, I just tell people, I don't know. I think this is something paranormal. Maybe this is a contact with the spirit, but Yeah, not for sure.
Yeah, it's always the best answer. I don't know. I like that one too.
Yeah, and also I'm not a big person like discount other people's experiences because again I don't know,
Yeah, and that's really what it comes down to. I always tell people, you're always one experience from changing everything you believe about anything. I don't care if that's religion or the paranormal or your belief in the fundamental goodness of humanity, or your best friend. You're always one experience away from all that changing. So who knows?
In the book, I like how you have it set up, the way you kind of categorized everything, and the way that you did the different sections of the country. You have the Northeast, and then so on. But you kind of have this little thing at the top of each of the cryptids.
Mm-hmm.
And I like on some of them how you put, it's not necessarily about the cryptid being real or not. It's about the story and how interesting the story is. So on some of them you have, this is a hoax that's been figured out.
Yeah. And generally, what I love about the cryptid stories is they're historical, probably unlike most UFO sightings, most ghost sightings. Cryptid sightings are actual historical events, right? What always happens is something is seen, and then that causes an entire town to go crazy for a month, a year, whatever it is. The newspapers follow it day by day, almost week by week. Other papers pick it up. People form hunting parties. They throw parties. They use it for marketing. So what was seen was a hoax, or if it was a legit cryptid, or if it was a misidentification, whatever it was, kicked off an actual historical event. So I always tell people that for the first time out of I can't remember, half a dozen nonfiction books, most of my research was newspapers this time, like 90% newspapers, because they are the ones carrying the story, and there were actual events. It wasn't just kind of lore or legends. It was literally printed about every day. So whatever happened, and that caused even cooler things to happen. So that's what I really love about cryptid stories, is that they are more than stories. They are histories.
Yeah. And like you said, you can find actual newspaper articles. I've in my research, I found one here in Tennessee where I live, and it was a serious newspaper article telling people about the Tennessee wild man, like watch your wives and your children because he'll come out and snatch them up.
Exactly. No, it's pretty funny because, depending on the journalism, the journalist or the paper, there's all different tacks taken on them. Sometimes it's tongue in cheek, sometimes it's real, like hard hitting journalism. Sometimes it's somewhere in between, but it's there. It was there for people to consume and make a part of their lives. So it's really fascinating to me. Yeah.
And it's amazing how some of these were, a lot of them I haven't heard of. A lot of the ones in the South I have because I'm from here, but a lot of these were just kind of a one and done story. And then it amazes me how some of these take on a life of their own. One of the ones, just for example, like the Falk Monster, that is carried over, and there's numerous books. And I think Lyle Blackburn, the cryptozoologist, is that's his forte, is the Falk Monster. And then other of these just kind of have faded into obscurity.
Yeah. I always call the ones that are like one event, I call them like one night stands. I always use the Braxwood County Monster, or the Green Monster, Flatwood Monster, whatever people call it. There's like different names for it. Literally is one event, one night, a few seconds of an encounter with a group of kids and one adult and a 17-year-old, maybe two adults, that counts as. But it went on to become one of the most unique creatures, and the town there capitalizes on it with museums and all kinds of stuff and merchandise. And it was one night like 60, 70 years ago, and it did all that. So other cryptids, like the Gloucester sea serpent in Massachusetts, which was a 19th century cryptid, it was around for like 2 years off the coast of Cape Ann. So that one night can change an entire town is really, really compelling.
Yeah. And there's other examples of that too, like the Van Meter Visitor, that town, they have a festival every year. And
that's the real reason why I want to do the book, because as you know, you're an aficionado of the field. Like almost every year, a cryptid encyclopedia of some sort comes out. Somebody puts together some kind of some kind of list of monsters with some drawings. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do cryptids, but I didn't want to do just an encyclopedia, the next encyclopedia in the list. So what me and my editor talked about finally was we just kind of leaned into what I do, which is like travel to spots. And obviously I can't travel to Bigfoot himself and show everybody, look, here's Bigfoot. Here's my night with them. This is what we did. At least I can't do it in a guaranteed fashion. So what I could do is go to places with Bigfoot statues, go to places that throw parties, throw festivals, go see historical plaques, go see, and that's when it turned into like the United States of cryptids, right? Because these towns all have formed identities around these monsters, whether it's the Hodag in Rhinelander or the Mothman in Point Pleasant. Not only have these stories are real, they're historical stories or in newspapers, they've actually become real, like in a way that's like very unique. They become real. In fact, they've bolstered entire towns' economies and became their mascots and became unifying elements of a community. So again, it happens sometimes with aliens. Doesn't always happen with ghosts, but even with aliens, it's mostly just Roswell, I guess. But it's a fascinating kind of phenomenon that just brings people together more than it makes it controversial.
Yeah, the fact that some of these little towns that otherwise probably wouldn't get tourists or anything like that, it's a good thing to kind of keep their main streets open and going to small businesses and things.
Yeah, I would say most of the towns. So they're almost always rural. There's a reason for that, but most of these towns you would never, ever, 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 ever go to. Even Arkansas, Folk, Arkansas, like what you just mentioned, it's so hard to get to that place that you have to go there on purpose. You're not just passing through on the way to something else. I had to fly into Shreveport and then drive north and then all these things. You would never ever go there. Like Whitehall, New York is about 3 hours for me, right? And Whitehall, New York is famous for a Bigfoot encounter back in the 70s. And today they have statues everywhere. There are like 5 statues throughout the town. And that's kind of their last gasp of like an economy, is that kind of tourism. I would never go to Whitehall my entire life had they not erected statues. In fact, even if they just had a Bigfoot encounter, I probably would never be there. But the fact that they put statues up for me to see and drive to and have a payoff at the end of that journey in a photo, that's why we go to these places.
Yeah, and I find it fascinating too. Like, for example, the Mothman. Like you're saying, that would be the only reason to ever go there. Maybe if you go to see the bridge collapse or whatever, but Mothman is kind of what brought that to the forefront too, and it was bigger news than probably if just the bridge collapse. But now they have like a museum, Mothman Museum. They got the big metal statue everybody takes pictures in front of, and so yeah, it's this whole industry for this small town.
Yeah, and again, it's way out of the way. It's never on the way to anything else. You have to go there. And the reason why it's small towns usually, like I put a few like Detroit's in there for their Nain Rouge, which is technically not a cryptid, but they do celebrate a monster, so I wanted to put it in there. It's always rural because the golden age of cryptids was 1950s to 1970s, right? That's when most of our cryptid sightings happening. 99% of the best ones happened during that time. And the reason why they needed to be there and they needed to happen that way is because if you have a creature that's really good at hiding, it needs habitat, right? So that means it needs to be somewhere it can hide, somewhere with lots of forests or lakes or whatever. So you need that. So that it almost immediately puts you in the rural places. But also for the actual reaction to the monster, you need to have a level of boredom, right? You need to be able to, like, you hear about a monster, you get in your car and you go join a hunting party, right? So today I always joke that if I heard about a monster, being seen in the woods near me, I'd probably follow the reports on Twitter, or like I wouldn't stop streaming Netflix documentaries. I would just kind of like wait for news to come to me. Whereas back then, there's nothing to do. Right? There's not as much to do, and so you were looking for something like this to like really set off, give you something to do. So people would go out and hunt, and like stories would happen just from the hunts, and marketers would jump on it. So that's kind of why, and these rural towns can really fix on that, because once the economy kind of shuts down for their industries over time, or the highway routes around them, or whatever happens to all these towns, they always have this one moment, back in the 1950s when like this giant turtle came out of the pond, and now they can celebrate that every year like they do in Churubusco, Indiana. So that's why it's almost always rural towns, because those are just the ingredients you need for not a monster sighting per se, but for a monster sighting that really builds into a phenomenon.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing I find interesting is around the country, some things that people describe exactly the same, but they all have different names. One of the ones, Bigfoot is definitely one of the ones, because I know like in Tennessee, there's probably 10 different names for Bigfoot. Tennessee Wildman at one time, skunk apes down in Florida, and it kind of all described as kind of the same creature.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I write in the book that I think definitely all 50 states have had a Bigfoot sighting. That includes tiny little Delaware and tiny little Rhode Island, and includes Hawaii out in the middle of the ocean, right? And part of that is because, it's a forest animal. So anywhere you have forest, right, you technically should be able to see it. But yeah, the term Bigfoot didn't come out until late 1950s. It's kind of when that was introduced onto the scene. So everybody that has their version of a giant hairy hominid didn't always have that terminology at hand to name their creature. So you get skunk ape, and you get, I can't remember, I'm in New Hampshire now, and I can't remember what ours are called, but ours are skinny, so they can hide behind trees. So they have a whole different name, but at the end of the day, they're still like giant hairy hominids. That's a really cool phenomenon, is that we have 1,000 names for Bigfoot, other than Bigfoot.
Yeah. The one in the South that always gets me is wood booger.
Oh yeah, in Virginia. Virginia has that one. It's a good one.
Yeah, the people used to, even in like Appalachia part of Tennessee, people always telling their kids, it's kind of became that boogeyman story. And I think that's kind of where the word boogeyman comes from. But, don't go out in the woods by yourself at night because the wood booger is going to get you.
No, that makes total sense. I love it. It gets tiring just saying Bigfoot after a while. You need some variety.
Yeah, there are quite a few in here that I've heard of, and there are quite a few that I'm just intrigued by, just based on the name alone.
Yeah.
Without even reading about it, like Owlbat Witch.
The Owlbat Witch. So that's another Bigfoot. Believe it or not. So that's Pennsylvania. That's Lancaster area of Pennsylvania, and it's these are actually tiny or small hairy hominids. They're more ape-like. They're not giant. They're not muscular. They're small, and they love apples. That's their whole story. They will steal apples. They'll throw apples. So every year, Lancaster, I can't remember the exact town in the county, but the town throws an Albatross Festival, which is mostly, cryptid stuff, but also a lot of apple products, apple pies and apple turnovers and apple sauce. So it's like the only cryptid with an actual flavor associated with it. But yeah, one of my favorite things with the book is learning these awesome words, like the snallygaster in Maryland, the snarly yow, which is also in Maryland, Gasquatch, which is just a gas station out in Oklahoma. Some great Shirorwarken, which is a coyote type beast out in Montana, I want to say. So yeah, the names of cryptids are fantastic. My favorite part of writing the book was learning all those.
Yeah, and then there's one in here that you just don't expect to be in Oklahoma, but the Oklahoma octopus.
Yeah. So some states, more than others, I had trouble finding a good cryptid, right? So every state has a Bigfoot, but it wasn't, I wasn't writing the United States of Bigfoot, so I couldn't have a Bigfoot in every state. And some of them just don't have, and everybody has a lake monster, right? Everybody has, and those lake monsters almost always reptilian, plesiosaurian, usually, or serpentine, one of those two. So, and that can get redundant after a while. And some are just hard to find cryptids for. So I went with the Oklahoma octopus because I didn't have any other octopus in the entire book. Like no other lake monster in the book is an octopus. And B, the story is so bizarre because it might have come from the media. Like it might have been like one of those cryptid shows that actually birthed the myth itself. The fact that it's freshwater, which there's no such thing as a freshwater octopus. The fact that it inhabits multiple lakes in Oklahoma, like if it's one octopus, it's somehow getting between lakes, or there's an entire species of octopus in all the lakes. And on top of that, all the lakes in Oklahoma, or at least the ones that are, most of them, or at least the ones I talk about, the octopus, are all man-made. So these things haven't been around for, thousands, 10,000s, millennia years. We made them in the past 50, and somehow they got populated with freshwater octopus.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, you wouldn't expect an octopus anywhere near Oklahoma unless somebody's got it in an aquarium.
But they lucked out because, again, names are so important, and they got that alliteration in there. That's perfect. Ocker, that's perfect.
Yeah, and then you got in here the Beast of Bray Road, which is spawned the Dogman phenomenon that we see now.
When you're a kid and you learn about cryptids, it's eye-opening, especially when you're a monster fan like I was. It's eye-opening to know there's a whole genre of monsters that are technically not fiction, right? Dracula, and the Mummy, and Gilman. These are all monsters you love, but they're fictional. They're from movies. They're from books. And then you learn about cryptids. You're like, oh, these are from real life stories. Oh my goodness. And then you get to the Dogman or the Beast of Bray Road, and you're like, oh, werewolves are actually a cryptid. They're not just a Hollywood fiction. And it just blows your mind that there could be, hairy canine humanoids out there.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the lady that brought the Beast of Bray Road, the journalist, to the forefront, she just passed away. I
saw that just a couple weeks ago. Yeah, no, she was the one that originally reported on it, right? So she had the original report of the Beast of Bray Road, did the drawing. So there's two important parts to a cryptid story, right? Naming it and a drawing of it. And she was responsible for both of that. And usually the person that gets to do that is usually the first journalist that writes about it, names him. That's how the Mothman came about. That's how Bigfoot came about. And then often the newspaper will hire an illustrator to do an illustration of it, and that'll be the shape of the creature forever. The Wolf Woman of Mobile, Alabama was that way. Or the eyewitness, if they have some drawing abilities, they'll draw it, and then that'll become lore. Like Bat Squatch was that way, and so was the Dover Demon. The actual eyewitnesses drew the image that became iconic of it. And in the case of Beast of Bray Road, Godfrey did both. She unearthed the stories. She wrote about the stories. And then she also drew the first image of it to accompany that story herself. She had I think she was a cartoonist before she was a journalist. So she had those skills and just basically made this phenomenon herself, like just single-handedly, and then of course dedicated her life to it and did a lot of cool stuff as a result of it. So cryptid lore is definitely a bit impoverished with her passing.
Before she wrote that article in it kind of went viral before viral was a thing online. I know I never heard of, Dogman or like you had some stories out there about werewolves that are supposed to be true. But yeah, that's crazy how one person can bring that story to the forefront. And now there are whole groups and people dedicated to doing nothing but, researching and searching for dogmen.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Create a whole genre of creature.
Yeah. And then some of these just make me laugh because, like, for example, the jackalope, which is, it's just a rabbit with antlers. And, how they just mash these animals together and you get a cryptid.
Yeah, and that's a great one because what was really the determining factor if it went in the book or not was if it's celebrated in a very real way. And not all of them are celebrated, of course. I couldn't find enough of them, but if they are celebrated, they make it in the book. And in the case of the jackalope, this is not a real creature. It was made by a couple of brother taxidermists. It's a rabbit with antlers, with like deer antlers on it. And it's just kind of one of those, gaffes, one of those kind of like just whimsical things somebody made up and turned into a product. Like literally they would just make more and put them out at bars and hotels. So it's not a real cryptid. There's no long story of sightings. There's no like that 1 week in 1957 when the entire town went crazy seeing jackalopes. It's just a made up creature that, the towns in Wyoming mostly, but there's states around them have just embraced. And like, this is our mascot, this thing that doesn't exist. And that was really the spirit of the book. It didn't matter that jackalopes didn't have a real life story. It mattered that, they were celebrated as creatures. Although there is some real life basis on it, and it's a sad story because there are horned rabbits in the in like 19th century, 18th century scientific literature, but mostly those were carcinomas on the rabbits. So it's a really sad story. They would have these giant tumors sticking out of their heads that look like horns. And then naturalists would say, oh, is this a new species of rabbit? Is there a horned rabbit? Is that a thing? So there is like some kind of precedent for horned rabbits in real life, but it's a very, very sad precedent.
Yeah, I remember as a kid, my dad was a truck driver. We used to get postcards from everywhere because he drove, delivered boats. So we went anywhere there was water all across the United States. And I remember us having a postcard that had a picture of a jackalope in like a meadow. and I've been familiar with the jackalope my entire life. Some people are like, what's a jackalope? But yeah, because we had that postcard, my dad thought it was funny. So yeah, we got a postcard from that area where the jackalope originated from.
No, I love it. I just love like a town or even a state, like making an identity around something either fanciful or controversial. Like right now, I talk about this a lot in the book, the way that towns and cities and regions get their identity is very constrained, right? In the US. One is by sports teams, right? You see somebody wearing, a Titans hat, right? They're from Tennessee or have some connection to Tennessee. And that's the identity of the state. And for some people up here in New England, it's always like, Patriots, Bruins, that kinds of stuff, Red Sox. But that's kind of boring to me. I'm not a huge sports fan. So like identifying by a sports team has always been a little bit uncomfortable for me. But that if you don't do that, well, all that leaves you with is history. And most of the history of the United States is all the same, right? We all have the same World War II soldier statue in the middle of town. We all are part of the Revolutionary War, westward expansion. It's all kind of the same. A lot of people that you wouldn't recognize by name in their history. And the third part is geographic stuff, right? Like lakes and fields and meadows and mountains and hills. But again, if you're trying to bring in tourism based on your hills or your fields or your farmland or your mountains, you've got a lot of competition for that. Everybody has something like that, a coastline, something like that. So you're not really standing out in the market. But if you're the only town, again, with a giant turtle coming out of its pond in 1958, that's only yours to own. You can own that and nobody else can have it, which is, again, why Bigfoot is a little bit less interesting these days, because since everybody's had a Bigfoot sighting, he becomes the World War II statue. Everybody could put up a Bigfoot statue downtown because they've all had a Bigfoot sighting, but not everybody has had a jackalope. Not everybody has had, a snallygaster, right? So those are the ones you can still, even the Mothman, right? Point Pleasant did a great job of grabbing the Mothman and making it its own, and just in time too, right? Because in the past, say, decade, there have been Mothman reports in Chicago and other states. So like the fact that they own Mothman and jumped on that, in a way that like Northern California didn't do in time for the rest of the country to grab Bigfoot. That's very important. Grab it and make it your own because it's yours to do that with.
Yeah, and you even have some stories in here. You've got one, the Gloucester Ghoul. You got a fairy story of goblins.
Yeah, that's my state, New Hampshire. Yeah, the Derry Fairy.
What's the Derry Fairy?
Derry Fairy. So Derry's the town. There's and again, New Hampshire is one of those states that is cryptid impoverished. We have a Bigfoot creature, we have a lake monster, and that's pretty much it. So for this town, I had this, and we don't celebrate any of them. We celebrate extraterrestrials because we're the site of like the Betty and Barney Hill abduction.
Yeah.
But we don't celebrate cryptids at all. And we don't have unique cryptids, but we do have in our records this one creature that was found. A guy went out actually this time of year because he was going out chopping Christmas tree, and he ran into basically what looked like ET with floppy dog ears. And it was, they stared at each other for a long time. Then the creature screamed and ran away. And he started writing letters to various scientists to see what was this creature I saw. Can you help me out here? And they called it the Dairy Fairy, not because it looked like a classical depiction of a fairy, but just because it rhymed. Because again, the name is so important. And I guarantee you, if it hadn't been called the Dairy Fairy, I probably would never have cared about it or come across it. But again, I had to do a one night stand cryptid for New Hampshire because again, we don't have a very unique cryptid in our midst, and also don't throw a festival that's getting one every year.
Yeah. Another one that's always caught my attention is the Wampus Cat, because all kind of across the South, there's like 300 and something schools that have the Wampus Cat as their mascot.
It's a legit phenomenon, man. And so the Wampus Cat, I believe, comes out of lumberjack lore, but which is fine. Lots of creatures do. The Hodag does. A lot of creatures come out of lumberjack lore. But what I don't understand is the connection between here's a creature that is outlined, and somehow schools across the country just want it as their mascot. And most of the time, and it varies. Their depiction of it varies, right? There's a 6-footed mountain lion. That's the Wampus Cat. There's a cat with a mace for a tail end. That's a Wampus Cat. There's some Wampus Cats are just 4-footed and they just stand up like a human being. But for some reason, this term or this idea, just for educational institutions across the country, they just wanted it as their mascot. They went past like all the typical like creatures like lions and tigers and eagles and falcons and knights and stuff, and just went with the Wampus Cat, and multiple places did it. Again, there's no other phenomenon that I've seen like that. I've seen weird mascots before. There's weird mascots all across the country, but not a weird mascot that's been picked up by, I don't know, scores of high schools and colleges.
Yeah, one of the interesting folklore in Tennessee that I've heard about the Wampus Cat was there was a witch in this small town, and the legend is that she would turn into basically a mountain lion, turn herself to a mountain lion. And she would go out and eat people's chickens and, sheep and things like that. Well, the town finally figured her out that it was her turning into this cat. And they went angry mob with, I just imagine movies, angry mob with the pitchforks and the the torches and all that. But they went to her house to, she was a witch, so they were going to take care of her. And they caught her mid-transformation. And so one of the Wampus Cat lores is that it's this half woman, half cat that runs around like East Tennessee.
Yeah, that's really perfect. Yeah, again, like once you have it, you got to make it your own for sure.
Some of these, like especially with like the Wampus Cat and things, I think it just amazes me the life they take on of their own, and how the story kind of changes depending on who you talk to. There's another local legend around here that has been in many books. Even Ken Gerhardt, the famous cryptozoologist, has it in one of his books, but it's called the White Bluff Screamer.
Yeah.
And it's this little town of White Bluff, Tennessee. And there's about 4 different stories to what the actual White Bluff Screamer is. In Ken Gerhardt's book, he had a woman who said she saw a white Bigfoot that screamed at her. And so he put it in his book as a cryptozoologist, as a story, from a reader or whatever. But then there's also the story of the White Bluff Screamer. That's this lady in white that you go down this certain road that I actually have family that live on this road at night, and if you see her, if you don't stop to pick her up, she'll chase your car and scream at you.
So yeah, that's actually a really good point about cryptozoology, is how often it like crosses over with the paranormal, like with ghosts and aliens and all that kind of thing. Like one of the jokes I make in this is that I have 2 different alien robots in this book. And an alien robot is a cryptid, and there's different reasons for that, right? One is, again, we get bored with just Bigfoot and Loch Ness Monster. We want as many different types of cryptids as possible, and there's like over 70 in the book. But we want variety, though. We want variety. We don't want them all the same. But on the other hand, aliens that visit the Earth are technically cryptids, right?
Right.
Most mainstream science will say, yeah, the possibility of extraterrestrial life is a very, very high possibility, or a possibility at least. But we don't believe they actually visited the Earth. So these are creatures that mainstream science says doesn't exist, which fits the definition of cryptid.
Yeah, and I found in the cryptid community how it's interesting. You got kind of a divide down the middle of some people that believe a lot of these cryptids are real, and then you have the other ones that believe they're supernatural. And you've got even another small camp that believes they're all extraterrestrial. Like somehow the dog man is like a pet of the aliens and they drop him off every once in a while, you know?
Yeah, they always so you've heard of Occam's razor, where like you kind of peel away all the explanations that don't make sense until you arrive at the one that makes sense.
Yeah.
In the paranormal community, there's an opposite reaction. There's an opposite move where, for instance, we've never found a Bigfoot corpse. If Bigfoot's a biological entity, we should be able to find his bones or his scat or something. So if that's not true, most skeptics would say, okay, well, then Occam's razor says Bigfoots don't exist. But paranormalists would say, well, what if we can't find physical remains because he's an alien? They're only here for a little bit and they take off. Or what if he's from another dimension? What if he's a ghost? There's all these like more and more fanciful explanations that put the cryptid firmly in the realm of other things, not biological, zoological, cryptozoology. So there's always that kind of impulse to say, well, we can't find them because they're invisible, or they just step into another dimension the second you want to look at them. So I love it when we're always trying to make it the most imaginative, which is kind of fun, honestly kind of fun.
Yeah, and for me, being a paranormal investigator, ghost hunter, my thought is that makes most sense to me, and whether it's true or not, of course I don't know, but maybe a lot of these cryptids that we're seeing is kind of a time slip, because there were weird. For millions of years, there were animals around without us, dinosaurs and other things. And so, maybe there's some sort of time slip that we're seeing some sort of weird creature from the past that we don't necessarily understand or have ever seen. And, a lot of people report them as physical beings because they look physical, but they're really not.
Yeah, some kind of glitch in the matrix.
Yeah.
I always think about that with like the Point Pleasant incident, because we talk about Mothman, but Mothman was probably, according to Keel at least, Mothman was probably only 5% of the weirdness that happened between 1966 and 1977 in Point Pleasant, New Hampshire, or Point Pleasant, West Virginia. There was like, silver-haired aliens and tiny little people and demons, and it was almost like I don't know, like some gigantic extraterrestrial experiment in that town for 1 year, or like the entire place went crazy, or it's not just about Mothman. It was scores of weird creatures that descended on Point Pleasant in that year.
Yeah, and then you have that weird TNT area. And there's even ghost phenomena connected with that area. Yeah, there's all kinds of weird stuff they've reported out that way.
Yeah, you hear about that connection a lot, where if there is a cryptid flap, there's also a UFO flap alongside of it that maybe the people don't pay attention to or don't draw connections with. So I think there's something to that idea that these things happen together, whatever it is. You can call it, they have a definite physical connection, or just people being hysterical, or people saying anything, or people being suggestible. There's a million reasons why, but generally when there's a cryptid sighting reported over time, there's a UFO sighting reported over that same amount of time.
Yeah, and it's weird. A lot of those sightings, you have places like the Uintah Basin where Skinwalker Ranch is. You have the Bermuda Triangle where weird stuff happens. People seeing, sea monsters out there. You have the Bridgewater Triangle up in New England. And for some reason, just these clusters in these supposed triangles. You have the Alaska Triangle where lots of weird phenomena happen.
Yeah, no, those are great. I love those. Like, Bridgewater Triangle is obviously close to my heart because it's only about 2 hours away from where I am right now. So being able to like superscribe an area where like a lot of stories happen, or a lot of stories stuck to for some reason is fascinating.
So in the book, what do you think is the weirdest cryptid that you came across?
Oh, the Nevada one. So Nevada is very, very cryptid impoverished. I had a hard time finding a lot of good cryptids there, a lot of unique cryptids. However, they have this one story about a giant sky clam. And the story is that like bunch of like kind of amateur pilots were riding these small planes around. Back then, I think it was after World War I, air war really started to take off. They made a bunch of planes at the end of the war. They were like, oh, we have all these planes. What do we do with them? So they kind of like sold them to pilots that they had trained to use, on their own. So they'd be flying around the buttes of Nevada, land on them, take off, just have fun in this new world of the air that had just been invented. And a group of them saw on the top of one of these buttes when they landed a clam, what was a giant flat spherical object that seemed to be breathing. Like the top half of it seemed to be hinged and seemed to be going up and down and up and down. It seemed to have a bite mark out of it, or a wound, and it's trailing the silvery blood out of it. And then as they watched it, they got closer to it and closer to it. Another one, a larger one, came out of the sky, came down, and some kind of like tube or something descended from it, some kind of biological tube, picked up this other clam and took off into the sky. So it's an aerial cryptid, which there's not a ton of. There's not a ton of aerial cryptids.
Yeah.
So that was perfect. And then the shape of it was so weird, so alien, maybe literally or just in the literal sense of the word, that it was like, oh, I need this in the book. There's no other clam cryptid that I have. So I had to put that in. But that is definitely the weirdest. And then second place, of course, is probably predictable. It's Fresno Nightcrawler, the walking pair of pants.
Yeah. That one fascinates me because you don't see a lot of like cryptid merchandise, but that one, for whatever reason, they make plushies out of. It's on all kind of t-shirts. Like, I got to understand like Bigfoot, being on merchandise, and even the Mothman. But why did, I always wondered why they picked the Fresno Nightcrawler of all things to put on merchandise and make merchandise out of.
It's a good question. It's the one that people always point out to me when they want to talk about cryptids, and they know I have a book full of them. They want to talk about the Fresno Nightcrawler. Obviously, we have the whole story that cryptids started with footage. So maybe it's the fact that we have an actual visual that people can like merchandise, but or just the ultimate weirdness of a pair of torso-less legs trotting across a yard is enough to get people happy about it. But you're right. It's a phenomenon that's like is very, very, very weird.
And the giant sky clam. Spoiler alert for anybody that's not seen the movie Nope. That kind of sounds, the story you described kind of sounds like the entire plot line for Nope.
That is really good. That is a really good point. I didn't even put that together. Nope is like my favorite movie from this year. Oh man, you're definitely right about that.
Oh, I loved it because I thought it's an original idea for once, and.
Oh, Jordan Peele, like he is so. I'm a big fan of concepts, like which they usually say is the mark of a amateur writer, but you're supposed to be obsessed with character or something like that. But I love concepts, and Jordan Peele takes such giant swings conceptually that he ends up doing things that nobody else is doing. And I find I respect that more in a storyteller than any other, like better than the ability to create tension and the ability to create a great character or a great storyline. The ability to create a concept that I haven't seen before is great. And he's done that with all three of his movies so far. And he's just like, and on top of that, he's just a masterful director that he pulls them off so well.
Yeah.
If anybody else had done Nope, it might have come off as a cheesy B movie, like really easily, but he pulled it off so masterfully.
Yeah, the way it's shot and everything, some of the shots that he got, it's I really enjoyed it. And I know some people, they're like, what the hell is that? I'm like, come on. It's something different and original.
Yes, exactly. That's all I want. That's all I want from stories. Show me. And that's kind of the whole, like, not to like tie things together too neatly for you, but that's kind of the whole appeal of cryptids. Show me something new in this world. Show me something I haven't seen before. Yeah, I've seen 1,000 tigers and lions and not rhinoceroses in every zoo I go to. Show me a mini hune or whatever. Show me a pukwudgie or show me something like that.
Yeah. So what's the cryptozoologist curse?
This is one of the saddest stories in the book. Well, the truth is you can study a creature your entire life. Let's go back to classic Bigfoot. You study Bigfoot your entire life. And that means obviously we don't have a body. So you're studying firsthand accounts. You're studying prints. You're studying fur. You're studying tales and folklore and history. You're researching newspapers. You're going out of the forest hoping for an encounter, right? That's how you study a thing that you haven't found yet. But you spend your life doing that. The second you find Bigfoot, the second you find that creature, you see him. He's right there in the clearing. You grab him by the hand or in a cage, and you lead him out into the world, and you just show the head scientist at whatever our big science institution is in the U.S. and prove Bigfoot is real beyond a shadow of a doubt. He immediately becomes not a cryptid. You're no longer allowed to study him. If you're a cryptozoologist and he exists, he goes to zoology. The zoologist studies him. The biologist studies him. Maybe the anthropologist studies him, depending on how Bigfoot turns out. But suddenly, Bigfoot is not a cryptid the second you find him. So it's a bit sad that success for a cryptozoologist is ultimately failure because you just made this thing, you just found this thing, and then now it's not a cryptid anymore. It's really bizarre phenomenon. I don't know if there's any other phenomenon like that.
Yeah, you don't want Forrest Galante coming looking for your cryptid.
Exactly. Yeah, no. Can you imagine like doing this multiple times? Like the hunt, this is one of those situations where the hunt is almost better than the find for sure.
Yeah, like we were talking about. Sometimes it's more about the journey than it is about the destination.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of these tie into, and I wonder how much influence they have, but I know Thunderbirds and even Bigfoot, Wendigos, a lot of them tie into Native American folklore. Yeah. And I wonder how much that plays into what people report about cryptids.
Yeah, that's an interesting topic because it's a controversial one for a lot of reasons, right? So For two reasons, really. One is that, it's easy to take a concept. Whenever you take a concept from one culture to another, there's a giant dumbing down that happens, right? Wendigo is a very complex idea, concept, story, warning tale, mythology, spirit. It's a very complex thing in Native American culture. But when we grabbed it, for settler culture, we were like, oh, it's a monster with horns.
Yeah.
We just dumbed it right down to that. So that's problematic there. But the other part is, for some reason, for obvious reasons, I should say, if you can hook your monster, if you see a monster in the woods, right, you see a hodag, if you can connect that to Native American stories in previous centuries, it legitimizes the story for most people, even though it probably shouldn't. So it's almost co-opting that culture and saying, oh, look, they had a story that was kind of a similar monster. That proves that this hodag is a real thing. So it's very dangerous in the sense that, a lot of times it's misinterpretation of myths and stories. But again, if it's a creature that exists, it existed 300 years ago. So like there should be other sightings besides yours. So it's a very fine line you have to cross whenever you bring in Native American lore or anything like that, like the skinwalkers. So I talked about skinwalkers in the book because, again, I had trouble finding. Now I forgot the city. It's another Southwest state. I can't keep my head straight. Skinwalkers they're evil magicians, right? They're evil wizards. Right. Which is not what a cryptid is, and you can believe in cryptids and not believe in evil wizards. And yet it's such a interesting concept, and it's, again, another type of monster for us. Again, at the end of the day, cryptid fans we're just monster collectors. We love Pokemon, right? We want to collect them all. So it ends up going in every single cryptid encyclopedia, just because it's such an interesting thing and has such a phenomenon, and especially with TikTok these days, where skinwalkers became a super big phenomenon of people seeing like elongated people walking around the Southwest. It's touchy, but it can't be ignored, the connection between Native American lore and whatever creatures are popping up today.
Yeah. And I've talked about that connection here on the show. I had a couple of great guests who are actually full-blooded, and I forget what tribe they're from, but they grew up on the reservation, and we talked about Native American magic and their culture and cryptids and little people and other things. It was fascinating to hear, their traditions and their exact stories and their take on Bigfoot and things like that are majorly part of their culture.
Yeah, and you can almost see it almost like it can infantilize a culture, right? If they have a story about, let's say, the Menehune in Hawaii, right? It's a kind of like a fairy story in England. They have these creatures called the Menehune, and they're little people. They're engineers, highly intelligent, whatever, but they don't believe they're real people. They're real creatures. But if somebody in settler culture said, no, those are real creatures. Those are actual real creatures. It makes it seem like, the native peoples or the Aboriginal peoples also believe they're real creatures and they can come off as gullible. They can come off as a lot of ways that right. It's just not right. So always have to be careful with like any kind of myth from any culture being translated or grabbed or accommodated or whatever for another culture.
Yeah. I love the book. I love how you broke it down, like I said, with the ones that, have been proven to be hoaxes and things like that. Mm-hmm. But also the fact that you went out and did the legwork to visit a lot of these places because you're that curious about, a lot of the phenomenon and stuff. I think that's cool.
The book isn't out to prove these things exist. It's not out to debunk them. If the hoax is part of the story, which in some cases the hoax is a big part of the story, a great part of the story, I was just out to celebrate them. Like, these stories are out there.
Right.
These phenomenon happened. Again, we have the records of them happening. And we have the town celebrating them. And that's the fun part. I want to just party with cryptids more than I want to do anything else with them.
Yeah, and I think it's important to hand down these stories because I think in a certain way with the internet, we're kind of losing the storytelling aspect of our culture, which has been a huge part. I know, especially here in Tennessee, it's a huge Appalachian folklore. It's a huge part of the culture. And I grew up hearing all kinds of stories because of that, living in proximity to East Tennessee. And I think we're starting to lose part of that with, videos and things like that.
Yeah. And the rate of consumption as well, right? Some of these creature stories survive the decades because it played out over a year. It played out over 6 months. It played out over 2 years. Whereas today, something pops up on TikTok, gets consumed for 24 hours by millions of people and then goes away, right? For the next thing. So there's no chance for these myths to like build organically and naturally and believably and interestingly. We just kind of like throw an idea out there, consume it, and then you're on to the next.
Yeah. So this book just recently came out, The United States of Cryptids, A Tour of American Myths and Monsters. So what is next for you? What do you got coming up here soon?
Can't announce it yet, unfortunately, but I do have another nonfiction book coming out. So it's in the vein of my past two nonfiction books, which is the Cryptid book and also Cursed Objects. They're both like nice illustrated entry-based books where I tell multiple stories. Like in Cursed Objects, it was 50 stories. In Cryptids, it was like more than 70 stories. So I have another one coming out in another kind of weird fringe topic. And then, of course, I'm also a novelist, so I'll have some novels coming out here in a bit as well. But again, always traveling to see something weird. That's always on my agenda.
Yeah. I love your website because you chronicle a lot of that, and it's cool to go and live, I guess, in a way vicariously through you going to all these weird things.
No, that's what it's there for. It's there for people that just want the stories without having to like pay the gas money. It's fine. I'm cool with that.
Yeah, and I like listening to the podcast too, to kind of hear it in your own words instead of just looking at pictures or whatever, to kind of hear you tell the story. It's one thing to read it, but then to hear you tell the story and kind of add a little more commentary and things is pretty cool.
Yeah, I always joke that the word I write the most is the word I have to be part of the book. Otherwise, it's not interesting to me to do in the first place, which is a bit, whatever, luxurious or a bit whatever. But I love being a part of the story. I love being there in the middle of the story. It's a lot of fun for me.
Yeah. All right, JW, thank you so much for coming on and chatting with us today.
No, it was a pleasure. I had a ton of fun. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it is my pleasure. Everybody go check out JW Ocker, the book, The United States of Cryptids, A Tour of American Myths and Monsters. He also has a lot of fiction books that he has written and his other nonfiction book about the haunted objects. And you can find him at oddthingsI'veSeen.com and on all the social medias. Thank you for listening to the Unseen Paranormal Podcast. Join us next week for an all-new, amazing guest. And in the meantime, please go on Spotify or Apple and give us a rate and a review. And go over to YouTube and hit that subscribe button. Also, if you would like to submit your story, you can email it to unseenparanormalpodcast@gmail.com, and you can remain anonymous if you like. Once again, thank you for listening. We'll see you next time. Stay safe out there.